So we're halfway through Wimbledon, and last week we launched the new version of BetAngel, which included loads of new tennis features, including the ability to completely automate your tennis trading, which has gone down a storm. But we've also had some questions from people saying, I've never traded tennis, and can you just give me some hints? And that's what I'm going to explain in this video. If you want instant access to new videos as they're uploaded, then please click on the subscribe button. Also, don't forget to comment on the videos. And if you're interested in learning more about BetAngel, visit betangel.com today and download a free trial. So tennis, as with all sports, is deep and varied. There are many variations of it and many different ways to trade it. But what I wanted to do on this video is just give you a quick overview of some of the key characteristics within tennis to give you some hints as to things that you may want to try. Some of it depends upon your attitude to risk and exactly how much trading you want to do and whether you want to automate it as well. But there are some key pointers within tennis that will allow you to determine exactly what you want to do and how you want to do it. Now obviously tennis is a sport that's predominantly traded in play, and it's guided by the ability to reach a certain score within the match. So at Wimbledon we have men's matches played up to 5 sets, and basically it's the first 1 to 3. And for the women, we have it played over 3 sets, the first 1 to 2, despite getting the same amount of money. Anyway, when you're doing a sport that has a definitive score to be reached, then of course the length of time that match could be in play is variable. So it's not like a football match where you have 90 minutes to score as many goals as you can. The length of that match could go on for a long period of time. But that's actually one of the beauties of tennis, because that means that the chance for the scoreline to actually end up in your favour at some point is much, much higher. So if you attempt to back somebody with the opportunity to lay off at some point within the match, because of the length of the match, especially competitive matches, your opportunity to get out at a profit is pretty vast on tennis. So there was a match last night that finished up 13-10, if I remember correctly, in the final set, and it went on for the best part of 4 hours. So, there's a lot of scope for the match to swing one way and swing the other and eventually complete your trade. So, that's an important factor within tennis, is the way that the match tends to swing backwards and forwards dramatically over the course of a match. And if you have ever played tennis, then you can very easily be 3-love up in a set to find yourself fighting to save the set just because you made a couple of silly shots. And that's one of the wonders of tennis, is it is very, very variable. But typically you've got the male tennis and the female tennis, and you can almost class them as 2 different sort of markets, really. They both play differently. They're played over different sets at Grand Slams. And therefore you should treat those markets independently almost, and a lot of people will often only trade one type or another. So for example, if you look at women's tennis, that's much more variable, simply because the women aren't as strong as the men. So especially at Wimbledon, where you have a low bounce and fast court, you tend to find that the men dominate with service, and the women, that is slightly not quite the case, perhaps apart from Serena Williams or some of the big servers. They can dominate their opponents. So what you tend to find is that the serve is typically dominant, but more so on the men. So if you're following a strategy that exploits that, then that's probably more favourable with the blokes. But what you could do is, at the start of a match, you're going to have many opportunities to be able to cash out for a profit. So you could take a view on exactly what's going to happen on the match. But obviously that requires a little bit of research, and you're going to have to make a view on it beforehand. So when we look at Dustin Brown last night, Rafa Nadal has always struggled at Wimbledon over the recent years, and keeps going out to lowly ranked players. So a lot of people backed Brown on the basis that he was probably going to be up at some point and they could trade out. And it turned out that Brown actually won. But you're making a judgment on what's going to happen in the match, and maybe you don't actually want to do that. So sometimes people will make a judgment on what's going to happen within one particular set. So they would back something at the beginning of a set on the basis that that player will get into the lead at some point, or perhaps win that set in the tiebreak. So they'll trade in at the start of that set or at the start of the match, and then trade out at the end of that particular set. Now you could trade from game to game as well. So the serve is very dominant at Wimbledon, and the chance of, if you go into Tennis Trader, one of the great things that we've done with BetAngel is not only do you get all the live scores, the ability to automate and so on and put it through a spreadsheet and so on, but you have Tennis Trader, and what Tennis Trader does is it takes all of the stats from the match and then it just projects them forward. So it can never be 100% accurate because you don't know exactly what's going to happen in the match and how, but it will give you a good idea of where prices are likely to be. So if you wanted to come up with a strategy to say, back this player and trade out when they win the set, then it will tell you roughly what your likely profitability will be. Like, as I said, that will vary, but at least it gives you a hint of the upside and downside to a strategy. So I suggest you use Tennis Trader to have a look at it. And what we've done on Tennis Trader is you can actually split it out by game, by set, so that you can actually see what happens if the game or the set follows a certain path. So say a player goes 2-love up fairly early on in the set and then the other player comes back into it. It will give you a hint as to exactly what up and downside you've got. So it's a very useful tool, so you must have a look at that to understand how the odds are likely to move. But you could also trade by game. So you could say, right, I'm going to back this player because he's got a very strong serve, he's very likely to win his serve, and maybe he'll break his opponent. He'll win a game on his opponent's serve. And that could actually leave you in a profitable position from there. Or maybe you want to go for the break. So basically you're opposing the server on every occasion on the basis that they're going to lose the game on serve, and therefore the odds will move into their favour. So typically you could, back at the beginning of a match, with the intention of trading out through some means at some point throughout the match. You'll get quite a high strike rate doing that. You'll get a very high strike rate as long as you're not over ambitious with how much money you're asking for. Or you could actually go from set to set. You could say back this player at the beginning of the set and trade out when they've won the set. Or you may actually, for example, you have a higher ranked player against a lower ranked player, and the lower ranked player wins the first set. That's their best chance of really dominating the match, is to get that first set away, put a bit of pressure on the opponent, and then hope that he crumbles. But typically what you tend to find is even if the outsider wins that first set, as long as the higher ranked player isn't having an absolute mare, then they'll probably come back into the match. So your trigger point for an entry may actually be after that first set, because obviously if you're backing at the beginning of the match, you have no idea how the match is playing out. Whereas in fact, if you go into the match after some of the activity has taken place in that first set, you have a much better idea of what's going to happen from the next point onwards. You've got a feel for the match and you can tell how one player is coping against another. But you could actually go from break to break. So in fact you wait for a break to occur in the match and then you start getting involved in the match from there, expecting the other player to come back into it, maybe in this set, or if not in this set, over the next couple of sets. And you could go point to point, but the problem with going point to point is there will always be somebody with a faster feed than you. So you need to make that reasonably generic. So for example, if somebody's love 30 down on their serve, the chance of them winning that game is still there. It's still quite high. In fact, Tennis Trader will tell you what that chance is. So you may want to jump in on the basis that somebody is love 30 down on their serve, but in fact as we get towards the end of that game, they pull it around and then the odds will swing dramatically back in the other direction. I mean, basically the rule of thumb inside a game is if a player goes 2 points down, then obviously the opponent is only 2 points away from being able to win that game. So that's a fairly significant move. So yeah, you could go set to set, game to game, back before the off and trade out, or you could go break to break if you wanted to. And there are, if you look on the blog, that we've actually posted lots and lots of information on the blog about specific trading strategies, how individual players play. Some players start really strong and some don't start so strong. And there are good and bad times to look for the opportunity to break as well. So say, for example, a match is 4-all or 5-all in a particular set, then whoever is serving knows that they must win that game, because if they're broken, then the service goes to the other player and then they can just serve out for the set. So towards the end of a set, the incentive for a player to really up their game and go for the break and go for a couple of weird, it could be that they just try something crazy and it comes off, because if they just get a couple of points, they get the opportunity to break and win the set. So towards the end of a set, that's an interesting period within the match itself. So yeah, there are actually quite a few different ways of cutting tennis and getting involved in it. What tends to happen is people tend to specialise in one thing or another. If the momentum shifts dramatically in one direction, then they may be tempted to back or lay a player based upon that dramatic shift in momentum. And one of the key things that I've learnt over the years about tennis is you very often take a position when it least seems to make sense. You're watching somebody, they're a set up, they're a break up in the second set, and you're sort of thinking, well, they're playing pretty well, they've got this, you know, shall I go and switch on to the other side? But the funny thing is that very often that is exactly the moment at which you want to get involved in the market, the moment at which you think the game is pretty much over. Anybody who plays tennis will tell you this. It just takes a couple of bad shots and then a dodgy serve, and suddenly you're under pressure again. So yeah, very often the point at which it all seems lost and that the player looks like he's going to serve out to win that particular set and he's romping away with it is very often the moment at which the match begins to turn. And that's the key characteristic of tennis, is that it does tend to turn very, very quickly. But yeah, there are loads of potential entry and exit points. Have a good look on the blog, because we've discussed many different things on the blog over time, and we've got a dedicated tennis section, so you probably want to check that out to give you a few hints as well. But yeah, anyway, hopefully that's given you a bit of a steer if you've never looked at tennis before, and hopefully you can play around and have a good go. You can do everything in BetAngel in practice mode, including the automation. So I suggest that you sort of just go ahead and try a couple of things based upon what I've said and information that's on the blog, and give it a go. Tennis can be a great trading sport simply because of its variability, and especially at this time of year there's lots of it on. So yeah, give it a go, and hopefully you'll be able to pull something out of the fire on some of these tennis matches. There's bound to be a couple of real crackers as we head into the second week. Anyway, enjoy! If you're interested in learning more about BetAngel, visit betangel.com and download a free trial today.